Dr. André Kimura graduated in dentistry at Universidade Norte do Paraná, Londrina, and had his specialization in implantology at Brainmark Institute in Bauru, Brazil. He postgraduated in periodontal and peri-implant surgery in São Paulo, and he works in his own clinical practice in Londrina, Brazil. He has been speaker for important associations and during international events such as Brazilian Society of Aesthetic Dentistry, National Congress of Modern Dentistry, International Dentistry Congress of São Paulo, International Dentistry Congress of Rio de Janeiro, Congress of Rio Preto, International Congress of Goiás, Natal Odonto Meeting, and Dentistry Congress of Paraíba.
Okay. Hello, my friends. Welcome to this webinar. First of all, I want to thank you, Zermak, for making me this chance to show a little of my work. And I want to, first of all, make a disclaimer about my English, since it's been a while since my last English presentation. And English, it's definitely not my native language, so I'm a little bit nervous about this presentation, but I hope everything goes okay, because I have a lot of tips and a lot of information that might be helpful in your daily practice. Okay? So today I want to share with you a little bit of my clinical experience using elastomers to obtain more predictable results in our daily practice. I'm a speaker here in Brazil with courses and online education program, but I'm not an researcher. And I think it's important to say that because I do read a lot of articles and a lot of the literature, international literature, and also the Brazilian papers that we publish here. And I really think that this is the path, this is the way to get a very precise and accurate dentistry. But my speeches and my classes, they are from a clinical perspective, because most of the time I'm with patients in my clinical practice, and then I will show you some of the work that I'm doing based on the literature, but also based in my clinical experience. Okay. I also have a continuing education program in Brazil. It's an online program that they make a monthly payment, and then I provide some classes every week. So this is a little bit of what I'm doing here, and I want to start with you talking about the conservative approach of the restorative dentistry. As you have listened here, my formal education is from implantology, but since I've been graduated from this area, I saw the necessity to make the restorative part in my clinical practice, because patients here in Brazil, they are coming for the implant, but also from the teeth, the final restoration from the same dentist. So it was very important for me to make the restorations and to deliver the full treatment, the prosthetic phase and the implant phase for my patients. And since then, I just started to make some laminate veneers, some composite restorations, because it's more affordable here in Brazil. Also, we can see that restorative dentistry has been going through a digital approach, and from scanners around the world and a global perspective. But here in Brazil, this kind of approach, it's very expensive. and it's even difficult to make the all digital approach, since we don't have the equipments for all the dentists, and this um, sometimes it's too costly for the patient. So it's very important to use the impression materials to make a very precision dentistry and very ethic results for our patients. So dentistry has been going through a conservative approach in the last decades, and this results in a very conservative preparation for our patients. What we can see in this slide is that we have in the same patient different approaches of preparation for different materials. At the right side, you can see crowns preparation. They are more classic. We have chamfer or the shoulder preparation, which allows us to give more material to block the color of the tooth, but also it's very invasive. So this kind of approach we are not making in some natural tooth. We have veneer with thin chamfer, which is great for veneers, and with indirect restorations in ceramics, because the technician can see more the finish line and can make a very good restoration that can adapt in this kind of finish line. Then we have vertical preparation or knife edge preparation, which is more conservative in the cervical area, and this is the kind of preparation that we are doing to make the more to allow the more resistance of the tooth. We now know with the recent studies and the articles that they are publishing that this first 2 millimeters from the cervical to coronal of the tooth, they are the most important part of the structure of the anterior tooth to avoid cracks and vertical failures. That means that the preparation from crown or even with chamfer in the cervical area, they are making the tooth more fragile for the long-term result. So when we are making a very conservative approach from the first 2 millimeters of the cervical area, we are also making this tooth more we are making this more predictable for the long term to avoid catastrophic failures, for example. Okay, so the vertical preparation, I think it's a very conservative approach, but has some cons. For example, they show a little of the color of the tooth. Since this area, the cervical area, when we are making a very thin preparation, we're also making a very thin restoration. So in order to make the correct emergency profile and the correct angle of the emergency profile, we have to work with a very thin restoration in the cervical area. And of course, this will result in any influence of the color of the tooth. Okay, so vertical preparation and knife edge preparation have some advantages, but also have some cons. And what is most important in these cases is to make a correct impression of the cervical area and make a correct registration of the cervical area in order to make a very precise adaptation in the interface from the tooth to the restoration. And we know that this knife edge preparation or this vertical preparation, we have more extended area of adhesive, continued adhesive interface. So we have an interface of the composite, the cement, that will make the bonding from the ceramics to the tooth. Okay, so this is very important to register the transition between the periodontal tissue and the teeth in order to make a very precise adaptation and in order to minimize the aesthetics outcomes that can go through not very good impression from this region. So vertical preparation, it's very important to make a very precise reproduction of the cervical area. And veneers with chamfer and with thin chamfer, of course, it's important to register the cervical area because the technician have to be able to see all the finish line to make a very good restoration. But it's easier to make that because it's very marked, the cervical area, and we can use retraction cords to control the fluids, which are hydrophilic, and we can also make the gingival sulcus more retracted to make the correct impression of the cervical area. But in vertical preparation, we do not use this kind of retraction cord to not change the position of the cervical area, the gingival margin. So it's very important to use hydrophilic materials to go through the sulcus, gingival sulcus, and also to be able to make a correct wettability and impression of the cervical area. Okay, so this is some of the context that we are seeing nowadays, and of course that crowns and chamfers, they are less conservative than the vertical preparation because in the cervical area we have some papers that they are showing us that the enamel in the cervical area have 0.3 millimeters of thickness, and this goes more thickness in the medium third and the incisal third, but in the cervical area we have just a very thin layer of the enamel. So this is very important to make a conservative approach through catastrophic failures. And here are some photos of my clinical practice that we can see that it's possible to make a very large preparation and still maintain the margin in enamel. Since we are talking about not going only just from buccal to lingual preparation, it's not just this kind of conservative preparation, but also from coronal to apical. So if you make a very extensive preparation from 1 millimeter of thickness using a burr with 1 millimeter of thickness, you can still have margin in enamel since you don't go from apical, coronal to apical. So the most important thing is to have in mind that you have to be conservative in buccal to lingual direction, and also from coronal to apical. One or another. You can go subgingival and have margin in enamel margins, but you will not be able to have both. You understand? We have to be conservative in buccal lingual or coronal to apical. But both, if you make extensive preparation removing the enamel from the buccal to lingual side and also to subgingival margins, then you will be with no enamel at all. So this is very important to have in mind, that it's not just the amount of preparation that you make from the buccal side, but also from the subgingival side to maintain the margins in enamel. Okay, so restorative dentistry have been moving towards conservative approach from for almost 30 years. So it's not just a trend, it's not just something that it's doing right now. And these are resulting to a more conservative approach in the cervical area and also in the occlusal surfaces. So now we are able to make this type of preparation. As you can see in the second molar, we make this is just a practice that I make in my course, but we are just making preparations as conservative as you do for composites, for example. So you can just reduce from 1 millimeter, 1.5 millimeter on the occlusal surface to make these indirect restorations. So there are some methods to do this, but we can make these thin restorations that can make the aesthetics and the function of a natural tooth. Also, this kind of restoration can be used to make a new OVD, vertical dimension augmentation. So you can make this to be more conservative, and these are some composites restorations. So in my courses, I explain how to make this kind of restorations using composite resin from a semi-direct approach or an indirect approach. And I will share with you some of the applications of the silicone to make this kind of restorations. Here it's with ceramics. So this is lithium disilicate that my technician Masaru Murayama here from Brazil, also from my city, that we are doing in partnership. And when we have this kind of very thin restorations, it's important to measure all the space that you have between the upper tooth and the lower tooth. So in order to check the space that we have here, we are using some rigid material, some silicone material. You can use here Occlufest. It will be easier because it's exclusively for registration. So you can tell your patient to bite this silicone, and then you can just check the space that you have for your restorations. In case of very conservative approach, I think this is it's a very nice way to check, and it's a very predictable way, since the silicones now have a very precise registration, and they are very rigid. So you can make this kind of check, okay? So be more conservative is be more precise, and the question is, how can we enhance our accuracy in dentistry? These are some of the work that I'm doing in Brazil. This was made with Miguel Abraão. It's a ceramist here in Maringá, city of Maringá, Brazil. And we are doing here laminate veneers with feldspathic ceramics and a cupping and the lateral incisor with zirconia. So it's zirconia infrastructure. Then we applied some feldspathic ceramic in the surface of the zirconia in order to make etchable, and we silicate this surface, and then we can bond another ceramics over this personalized cupping, you can say that. So it will be a very conservative approach, since we do not have to make very thick laminate veneers in all tooth to equal the colors. We can make a cupping, make a characterization of this cupping, and then we can make another veneer over there. So this is another case with very thin laminate veneers. Ceramist Paulo Batistella, which is now in US, but he's Brazilian, and we have a pleasure to work together. Feldspathic ceramics. This is another case from a ceramist, a Brazilian ceramist called Daniel Morita from São Paulo. Daniel Morita using here Emax press with feldspathic ceramics over there with application of layered ceramics in the incisal edge. Okay, and this is the bonding phase using rubber dam, and you can see here through the contrast of the rubber dam and the tooth that we have a very precise adaptation through a chamfer, a light chamfer in the cervical area. And this is the final result that we can see using veneers, ceramic veneers. And of course that when we make all the steps with a very good adaptation, with a very precise adaptation, we have a very healthy tissue. And healthy tissue means that we have a long-term result. The patient will be satisfied because the margin is healthy, and of course this will be a very good outcome. Okay, so here is the importance of the periodontal tissue, the health of the tissue, and some cases that I will show you later how to solve even with implant situations like that. So the initial case, patient had bad positioning of the implant, then we finish with ceramics. So elastic impression materials we can divide in two categories. First of all, the alginates, and then the elastomers. My speech here, it's more through the elastomers, but I will show you some practical uses of impression using alginates and how can we use this in our daily practice. So you can use to make an overlay restorations. For example, composite restorations when you have one cusp of the tooth that they are lost. Okay, so this is for a semi-rigid silicone with a semi-direct approach. You can use silicone to make the model and then make the restoration into the model. This we have a step-by-step and how to make this kind of restoration. First of all, we make the cusp that they are lost. So we use as a reference the lateral tooth. Of course, this can result in a little occlusal adjustment, but it's not very important since we have the lateral tooth as a reference. So we are not using the lower tooth as a reference here because it's a silicone die model, but in a practical way, it's just few occlusal adjustments. So we make this lingual side, this palatal side, and the proximal side, and then we make the occlusal surface using vertical condensation of the composite and lateral condensation, and then we make this characterization use endodontic file with some stains to reproduce the natural tooth. So this is a clinical case that we are using here, using alginate to make the impression, and then using a semi-rigid silicone die for the restoration in a semi-direct way. Okay, just to show you that we can use alginates for this purpose also. But when we are talking about great reconstructions, we have to use elastomers since they are more stable and they are not they have better detail reproduction. Okay, so C silicone can be used to make cases that they are not so critical as the wax up phase. So this case we are using a technique called matrix BRB. They are published by a dentist here in Brazil, Weber Risse, Luiz Gustavo Barrotti and Gustavo Bertoldo. They published this technique using custom silicone matrix that are made direct from the tooth of the patient. So we just make a portion of the Zeta Plus. We use it in the incisal edge of the tooth, as you can see here. And then with a diamond burr, we are just making some personalization, some customization of the incisal edge. And then we are making the guide for our restorative phase. So patient here had an old restorations, so we just remove it and define the position of the incisal edge. When we are defining the position of the incisal edge, we can and we have always to consider the face of the patient, not only tooth. We have to see how it will be the position of the incisal edge through the face of the patient. And we have some references here that you can use. This is from the book of Galip Gurel from 2003. And here we have some references through the lips. And for women, we have 3.45 for 30 years of exposition of the incisal edge. For 40 years, 1.6, 50 years, 0.95, and from 7 years, 0.2. So you can see that as long as the patient is more, it's older, you can exposure less the incisal edge. And we can make a test using direct composite resin to establish how much we will put on the incisal border to make this new restorations. So once we've finished the incisal position of the smile, we can also consider the other parameters. For example, if we have an angulation of all the anterior tooth, in this case I'm showing that we can make an wax up to evaluate how much we can reduce from the incisal border to make this compensation, and how much we can put more wax or put more restorative material to make this compensation. So this is a case that initially it's more indicated to be treated by orthodontics, but patient has not option for this approach. My dad is also orthodontist, so he have making this approach for her, but she didn't like it, so we go for restoration and for and a restorative dentistry solution. Okay, so this position of the incisal edge we can also make in these cases that we have a very short teeth in all the system. So in these cases we can use some other parameters, for example dental proportions. So I'm sharing here with you some of the measures that we have in this kind of cases, so you can evaluate what patient have here in the right side, and then what it's ideally in proportion. So we have here some charts that you can evaluate. In blue we have the incisal cervical height. We have the mesial distal in red and mesial distal in the cervical area in yellow. So you can use these parameters in every tooth to make the final format of the tooth. Also, we have another parameters that are published in the literature. You can use some medium parameters, as Pascal Mains already published in 2003. And also we have percentage parameters that you can use. So this is some references that you can take over there to establish the position of the incisal edge and how much you will enhance the incisal edge of the patient. So once you establish the position of the incisal edge, you can now make your restoration. In this case, I'm using a direct indirect technique, which has been published by Newton Fall, and we make isolation of the tooth using glycerin jelly into the tooth, and then we make the restoration without a adhesive technique. So the composite, they are put it into the silicone as a reference of this incisal edge, and then we make all the restoration without adhesive into the tooth. So after make all the stratification process, we just took off this restoration and then make all the adjustments outside of the mouth, and this will make it possible to obtain a very good polish in this interproximal area, and we'll be able to make a very good emergency profile, a very thin polish and a very thin restoration in the cervical area. We'll be able to make a very good transition of the buccal proximal area, and this will result in a very aesthetic result. So we finish with the primary and the secondary anatomy, and the tertiary, which is texture and more effects, we can make later after the bonding. So this is the final outcome with composite resin from a direct indirect approach. Okay, we are using here composites from Tokuyama. Tokuyama, it's supra nanoparticles fillers, which gave us a very good polish and a very natural result. So this is the final result, what patient have after the increase of the incisal area, and this is the effects that we'll be able to reproduce. Okay, and this is the follow-up from 6 months after in function. You can see that periodontal tissue, it's better. Here it's still a little with recovering from the removing of the old restorations, and here it's after healing. Okay, so Zermatt now will show how to make this kind of palatal shell with silicone. Okay, using very high precision silicone. You can just play. You can play here. Now, okay, we can just remove the video. Okay, perfect. Nice. Now, this is another application of the direct-indirect technique from Newton Fall. We can use for class 5 restorations, and just put the composite resin over the gingival tissue. Then we remove this restoration outside of the mouth, and then make the all the finish line and all the polish outside of the mouth. So this will give a very polished area and a very precise adaptation, and then we can make the bonding phase, and it will be easier to control the fluids and the liquids through the cervical area. So this is some, there are some indications of the silicone in your daily practice. Now I want to share with you how to use a silicone to make a very precise guide to reduce position of the tooth. This patient, of course, he needs orthodontic treatment. We have proposed an orthodontic solution for him, but he opted for the composite restorations since he was not allowed to remain with the orthodontic treatment for 2 years. So he just opted for the restorative approach. I explained to him that it will be necessary to make a little preparation at the distal part of the incisal centrals, and then we make an wax up and guide with some silicone, silicone over the wax up. Okay, so here is the guide, the silicone guide at the palatal side with very rigid material, and at the buccal side we make this silicone guide. They are showing us that we have to make a preparation, a thin preparation at the distal area, which is that the tooth is, they are touching the silicone guide. Okay, so to make this reduction, we use a very thin burr with a knife edge finish line, and we use this burr in this side of angulation. We have to use this way, otherwise you will just make the preparation at the palatal side, and if your burr just make the contact to the palatal side, you will be making a finish line at the palatal side, and when you see, it will be almost a crown or a restoration that involves this part of the palatal side. So you have to use this type of burr, which gives us a finish line that it's a knife edge finish line in this orientation from buccal to palatal. And then you will just removing the enamel from the proximal area, and the result is just this. As you can see in this image, we have all the preservation of the palatal side, and the cervical area of the palatal side, they are intact. We are just not removing enamel from the 2 millimeters from the cervical area to coronal area. As I told you at the initial of this webinar, this is the most important part. We don't have to remove enamel from the cervical area. We are just removing enamel from the proximal area. And from the biomechanics of the tooth, they are not critical. Of course, they are important. Of course, we don't want to remove enamel, but in some cases, it's necessary to give more aesthetic approaches. But it's not critical from the biomechanical perspective or for the risk of catastrophic failure for long-term results. Okay, so now we just make the guide, the silicone guide, and here's the detail of the space that we are able to have, and this gives us more predictable results through our composite restoration, since we have the same space here, and the influence of the color of the tooth will be less important in this case, since we have a very homogeneous or very same space for all the tooth. Okay, so now I'm making the direct indirect approach. As you can see, I put a composite, a dentin composite resin, then I make the cutbacks, I remove composite to make space, to give space through the characterization and through the natural layering technique here. So we're using dentin from Harmonize. Harmonize, it's a composite from Care. And then we are using the enamel from Tokuyama, okay? So here is making some adjustments. Here it's a trans effect composites that we are using here to mimic a natural result. And then we are taking off this restoration to make all the adjustments of the cervical area outside of the mouth. So then we finish, we just bond here and make the texture and characterizations after the bonding phase. And here it's the detail of the dental floss that they are showing us that we have a very good adaptation and healthy tissue. Okay, this is right after the finish of the restoration, and so it's a very good application of the silicone for preparation, tooth preparation. I'm also using here for ceramics, so you can use this kind of guides to make the preparation for ceramics and then to make the impression for the final restorations. This is a case for ceramics, the lithium disilicate from my lab here in Brazil, Masaru Murayama, and here's the final result. Okay, as you can see, it's very important to make a good impression of the cervical area and a good communication with the laboratory. Okay, so as you can see, the A silicone and C silicones, they are very useful to you to make indirect restorations from composites and ceramics. Now I want to share with you some of my my opinion about the hydrophilic vinyl siloxanes or A-silicones hydrophilic. So this is a photo from Hydrorise, which is a hydrophilic polyvinyl siloxane. And Hydrorise offers an excellent contact angle between the stone and the silicone phase. As you can see, stone, it's a hydrophilic material. We mix with water, and silicone, they are usually not hydrophilic. So when you are putting stone over the silicone, usually we don't have this kind of integration, but with Hydrorise we have. So we minimizes the bubbles here that might be occurring during this phase, and it will be especially important during this subgingival impressions or these situations that we have implants or a very wet surface to make the impression. Okay, so I want to share with you a case about implant that I think Hydrorise, it's a very useful material. And we also have Hydrorise implant, which offers a very dimensional stability to register and to transfer the position, the three-dimensional position of the implant. So in these cases, we are now personalizing the abutment with some acrylics. So we make the copy of the emergency profile using acrylics, and then we use Hydrorise implant to transfer this personalized abutment, this custom abutment from the mouth through the laboratory. So this is just a sequence that we are making in order to copy all this critical emergency profile. So as you can see here, we just extracted the tooth, put the implant at the same appointment, the appointment of the extraction, and make the alveolar ridge preservation with a custom healing cap. Okay, so this was healing with this with composite. We customized it with composite, and then we are transferring the emergency profile with a acrylic. Now this is pattern, and then we are just transferring this with hydrorise, and this results in a very predictable and precise impression of the three-dimensional position of the implant. So very good and very useful material to make this kind of transfer, since hydrorise implant has a better stability for this kind of impression. Okay, so it achieves great stability to transfer to implant, and secures that correct three-dimensional position is maintained even after removal of the oral cavity. And another case, this patient had she came to us with a bad position in implant. We removed the crown and just make a provisional at the lateral tooth. We just bonded the provisional crown here and waited the tissue come to coronal position. So this is the tomography and the radiographic aspect of the implant. We have a very good palatal bone implant contact, but a lack of bone implant contact at the buccal side, and we just maintained the implant since it had a very good stability, and the removal of the implant will cause a very huge defect and the possibility to just make a problem into this papilla area. This interproximal area will be for sure compromised if we option to remove the implant. So since we have a very good bone implant contact in the palatal side, we option to maintain the implant, and we make this provisional at bonded in the lateral tooth and making the correct cervical area. So after the 2 weeks, we just saw the tissue come to coronal side because we have this crystal bone preserved in between the centrals and between the central and the lateral side. So it's natural to the tissue come coronal, and then we make some connective tissue grafts to close the defect, and then we make another one to make a more thickness of the tissue. So we make it here the second surgery, and the third surgery it was to make to gain some height of the tissue to come to coronal direction. So here it's tuberosity connective tissue that we are putting here, and then the final result after the surgery, as you can see, we have a very thick, a very stable tissue here, and now it's very coronal directed the tissue, and the implant it's way down the tissue. So this is after healing, and then now we have this kind of situation that we can make a personalized abutment through a new zenith contour of the gingiva. So we make a punch here to access the implant again, and personalize the abutment and all the faces again with a provisional provisional phase, and then the impression using here, we are not using hydrorized implant, we are using hydrorized, the conventional hydrorized, because we are making also laminate veneers for the other tooth to give more symmetry and to give more aesthetic outcome. So this was done by Miguel Abraão from Maringá. Here's some details of the laminate veneers, of the texture of the case. Here is during the condition of the ceramics. They are all feldspathic ceramics. And here is the bonding phase. We are just proving here, and the bonding phase with rubber dam controlling all the wet from the tissue. And then after bonding, this is the immediate final result. And here is the follow-up photos that we can see that tissue is now very stable and very healthy. So I think it's the most important thing. Okay, and recently 2 years of follow-up. This is what we see of with the case, and very good stability considering that we do not remove the implants. Okay, another case just to finish, to show you how important it is to make a very multidisciplinary approach. Here we have some provisional that we are taking to new zenith, the correct margin. I just removed some of the tissue that was growing in a bad way here in the interproximal area, and after the connective tissue graft, just make the provisional phase, and this is the outcome that we are obtaining using a silicone to make the guide for this provisional. So we just put the silicone, we just took an impression of this initial case, and this impression will be the matrix for the provisional that we are going to put here. So patient come to our office, we make an impression, and then we make a silicone guide that will allow us to make this provisional. And then we just cut the cervical area, give another zenith contour, and then we can make the approach with connective tissue to come coronally, and then after the healing, here is the outcome. This is a provisional phase. This is not final result, but as you can see, the cervical area is perfect now. Of course, the distal part, they are a little apical, but it's not possible to come with this papillae through coronal side, since we don't have bone support here at the distal area of the central. So it's not possible to come with a new papillae here. It's just the central side that it's possible. Okay, and another application of the silicone, the hydrophilic silicone, it's from biologically oriented preparation technique from Ignacio Loy. Ignacio Loy have published this kind of approach through a very critical situations, as you can see here, and this is only to remove the finish line and make a provisional with some acrylics that we can just pull the tissue and make a new pattern of healing at the cervical area. So this is how we do it to reestablish this area. This is the case of one of my assistants. So she had this bad restorations in the first slide, and then we just make bopped vertical preparation at the distal area. This is canine transformed into lateral, and just make this bopped preparation, this vertical preparation in the distal size, and the direct indirect approach with composite resin to make a very nice outcome of the lateral, okay? And this will be healing, and this tissue will come to the distal side of the lateral. And finally, another case of some vertical preparation that is important to have a very precise impression, because in these cases we do not put we are not going to be able to put a lot of retraction cord at the cervical area, because the preparation most of the time they are at the limit of the connective tissue. So since we don't have space enough to put two retraction cords, it's very important that the hydrophilic silicone can go through the subgingival area and copy all that part of the tooth. So it's very important to have a material that can make the correct wettability, that have the correct wettability in the cervical area and into the tooth. So here another images of vertical preparation. Now you can see that it's not biologically oriented tooth preparation technique. This is not bopped, but it's a vertical preparation which we are not using retraction cord to make impressions. So HydroRise can make a correct impression of the cervical area even without retraction cord. As you can see into the right side of the screen, you can see that we have a very nice copy of the cervical area even without retraction cord in vertical preparation. So you can see here that it's perfect, the cervical area, and this is the stone that we are going to make our composite restorations or ceramic restorations. You can make as you want it, and this is the final results of the restorations into the stone. Okay, you can see that it's perfectly adapted and a very good model to be working. Okay, so wanna just sorry again for my English. As I told you, it's been a while since I'm not speaking in English. I hope you could understand me during this presentation, and just open here for some questions and some doubts. Okay, thank you again.
We thank our speaker and wait a few minutes for you to submit your questions. We remind you that if you have any questions, you can write them in the box on the left named Questions for the Speaker.
First question, if I have a favorite technique for impression. And I do not have a favorite one. I think it will depends on the patient and the case. For example, for implant impression, I prefer one step because I can make an open tray impression easily. So I prefer one step. But in most cases of indirect restorations, I prefer two steps because I think it's more easy to make a very consistent result. So it depends on the case and on the patient. Okay. Can you repeat the second question here? Can you repeat the characteristic we need in a silicone for mock-up? Well, it's important to have a very detailed reproduction, which is allowed by C silicone and A silicones. Also, it's important to have a very good stability. If you don't have a very rigid material, you can enhance this stability using a thick layer of the silicone. So for example, if you are using conventional A silicone, you just make a thicker mock-up barrier, okay? But if you are using a more rigid material, for example, the Zeta Plus, the first phase of Zeta Plus is a little more rigid, so you can use thickness a little thin, a little more thin, a little thinner than the A silicone barrier. Okay, but the most important thing is to have a very very good detail reproduction. Okay, if you do not have this kind of detail reproduction, you can use the light body phase of the material to enhance this precision, to make a more precise, or you can use a pressure pen, you know, that you put the silicone and you use pressure to make a good stability. Okay. Another question here? It's could we use two different brands of C silicone in the same impression? It's not a very good recommendation, because it might have some incompatibility between the brands. So it's not a recommendation to use different brands with them. In theory, it will be possible in theory, but we cannot certify that this will work in all the situations. It might be some situation that you will see some incompatibility, and of course it's not good for our patients. Okay. Okay, if you have, there's no questions more. So I want to thank you again for the attention. I hope it have been a good presentation and some useful information. Again, sorry for my English. I was not practicing since the last 2 years or more, or even more. So we are not speaking. It's not very good, but I think it's I just share the most important part. Okay. Thank you again. Thank you, Zermac, for the invitation, and all the participants. Thank you. Thank you very much.
There are no further questions for now. We can therefore close our meeting. We thank Dr. Kimura for his participation and for his clarity, and thanks to all of you for attending. In a few days' time, you will receive a link with the recording of this session. Zermac webinar team wishes you a nice rest of the day.